Susan Clark. This is her book right here, okay? This is the back on it, okay? And I want to read this book, and it's appropriate to read it today because I wanted you to know, and it's Before Grief. She is a doctor, Dr. Susan M. Clark. And if you would allow me, I will read it to you tonight. Well, I'm going to start reading it. I don't know if I can get it all read in one night, but it's forward. It says, let's see, I'm not going to read you all that. I'm not going to read the acknowledgments. I'm going to read the introduction, though. You see that right there? If you will screenshot your phone and take a picture of that right there, you can get this book. Okay, I'm not making anything off of this book. If you buy one, it'll be because you bought one. I asked her if I could read it, and she said I could. Have you got it? If you hadn't, say it. I'll put it back up for a minute. Introduction. I never thought I would write a book, and if I did, I questioned if anyone would consider reading it. I remember hearing someone say, everybody has a book in them, a story to tell. That I do have a story to tell. My story is about continuing, having something to give you hope after a loved one has died. I was moving in the right direction with a draft of words after about 4 members of my family died. My niece, 1979. My mother, 1997. My grandmother, 2000. And my older sister in 2001. When my father died in March 2022, it definitely reminded me that what I had to say was going to be helpful to many people. I will share later in the book the experience I had with my dying father. It was very powerful. Before finishing my writing, my mother-in-law died. I am forever changed by these deaths. Death is final. There are no last curtain calls, no do-overs, no last words, kisses, hugs, and laughter from them. If you long to hear words of comfort and didn't have them in your time of grief, especially from the person who left you alone, this book will give you guidance. It will help those of us who remain behind in their absence. In this book, I will show you how to prepare letters for your loved ones to read after you've died. Your letters of love will help them to make it through their journey of grief with less pain and difficulty and with fewer challenges. The letters will share what I wanted you to know by the name of the book. I will share my and others' journeys of grief. By understanding how difficult the journey of grief can be, it is my hope it will give you a greater appreciation for the benefits of your letter will provide. You will be reminded of the importance of expressing yourself to your loved ones while they are here to hear your voice and be guided how to. You will also learn how to prepare information that will help them know your last wishes and where your important papers are, like wills, insurance policies, and etc. While you won't be able to erase their pain altogether, you can ease it. Let's begin. Part 1, The Journey of Grief. Chapter 1, Journeys Through Loss. What is a journey? Webster's Dictionary says that a journey is an act of traveling from one place to another. The journey of grief involves so many things. It involves the process of replacing the sting of death. It's processing the emotional, physical, spiritual, and social relationships we had with the deceased person. It's acknowledging the loss, coping with the pain, managing change, and rebuilding our lives without them. It's a lot, and it can feel overwhelming. If we're traveling from one place to another, where is this place we're traveling from? Are we traveling from having peace of mind and comfort in knowing our loved ones are still alive to talk, laugh, and build memories with? Are we traveling to a place of discomfort and emotional and physical pain? If grief is a journey, I want to believe it has a start and finish, traveling from one place to another. For me, grief never ends. It just continues differently. I start my journey of grief with my mind spinning out of control. I can't get my footing. I'm in shock. Disbelief. I question myself. Wasn't I just talking to them yesterday, last week? I start to scream, yet no sound can be heard. I hold my stomach tight. It's gut-wrenching. I feel like I'm going to throw up. I sit down to keep from falling. I rock back and forth like a crazy person. Maybe I'm going crazy. I can't make sense of what I just heard. A loved one has died. In this book, I will refer to the grief we feel from the death of a loved one. But grief encompasses so much more than a physical death. Yes, we grieve the death of a person and the person not fully developed in the mother's womb from miscarriage. We grieve loss. We grieve lost relationships, breakups, divorce, etc. We grieve missed opportunities, not getting that interview, not being selected for a job, not getting a promotion, not having a prom date, not having a boyfriend or girlfriend, not getting that loan approved, etc. We grieve material things, property being destroyed by fire, hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, cars being totaled or stolen or repossessed, or the loss of any other item that is valuable to us. We grieve due to the loss of good health. We may have limited sight, hearing, and mobility. Grief affects us all. The journey of grief is not one I wanted to start. What I had noticed about people who had never experienced death is that they seem to think their life is invincible. Death is not even an option. It won't happen to them or to anyone they know. They believe their youth and good health will prevent unexpected losses in their life. The belief that death will not happen to them keeps them blind and ignorant. They can feel safe. They avoid the pain of knowing people cannot control death. Believing you're invincible and pushing death out of your mind, you can live a life of adventure, being carefree and maybe even reckless. I remember when I volunteered as a chaplain at a hospital, I volunteered about 2 hours per week as part of my cumulative hours needed for the Georgia State Licensing Board. One young male I visited was badly injured while speeding on his motorcycle. He was on my list of patients who would like a visit and prayer. I remember in our conversation that this young man knew speeding was dangerous and that an accident could happen. He also knew of others who had serious injuries in an accident. He still believed it would not happen to him. He believed he was skillful enough to avoid any possible tragedy. His accident was not unto death, but it demonstrates the mindset of feeling invincible. I can avoid injury and death even with my reckless behavior. As a psychotherapist, I've counseled numerous clients dealing with grief and loss. If our mindset says we're invincible, what is our mindset when death does occur? Think about it for a moment. A lot takes place. Myriad emotions build up that we may have never experienced before until the pain is identified as grief. Often, people think they are about to have a heart attack or lose their mind, sometimes to the point of needing to be hospitalized. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of preparing your letter of love to help those remaining in their journey of grief. Death affects us all, as you'll see in the following cases, and what a different experience one has when death is sudden as compared to when it's drawn out. Mary. I remember one of my clients, I'll call her Mary. I had been counseling her for several months. Our goal was for her to have a better relationship with her family members. Who doesn't want to improve family relationships? In our sessions, we discussed primarily her relationship with her husband and her 2 adult children. Most of the focus of our sessions moved towards her son who had a substance abuse problem. She was moving through life with challenges. Most married people with adult children face them. Then everything changed. One night, with a knock at the door by a police officer, I remember her calling me, shocked and in tears, when her son died suddenly. It was so devastating that she couldn't breathe like she had prior to this death. Intrusive thoughts continued to flood her mind. Why? No explanation was given her. Why did it have to be him? Her son had made several poor choices that caused him to have a troubled life. Then as he had gotten older and matured, he was turning things around. Through programs and much prayer, he turned life around for the better. Mary was a Jesus Christ follower and believed the scripture, Proverbs 22:6, the KJV. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's what her son had done. He had gotten involved with giving back to the community and helping others. Things were looking good for him. He actually was being a model for the younger males who also needed guidance to turn their lives around. A condolence message she later read said, "He was exuberant in life. I was confident he would find benefit to many in need in the future. He was full of life." Others saw his change too. but his life was ended suddenly by a car accident. It's been a long journey for her. Her mental state did not improve enough for her to continue work. She eventually retired early from her place of employment. Mary couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She constantly had nightmares, recalling when the police officer came knocking on her door, telling her the tragic news that her son had perished. She could not concentrate. She wasn't herself. She barely existed day to day. The only time she had some peace was sleeping. But then she would wake up remembering she was living in a world without her son. Since his death had been sudden, she had a different mindset. She now had fear living amongst the living. She lived daily with the dread of unknown happening, the unexpected losses that can and may happen. She was constantly being cautious, the fear ceaselessly bearing weight against her. It remains difficult to continue life without her son. Mary says she is living for eternity. It's two scriptures that come to mind. We are confident, I say, and willing, rather, to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. 2 Corinthians 5:8. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. John 14:2. She didn't get the chance to tell him one more time how much she loved him and how proud she was of his accomplishments. What can we learn from Mary? Talk to your loved ones and friends now. Share how important they are to you and what value they bring to your life. This is Carla. Another client, I'll call her Carla, sought my services because she was also grieving the sudden death of her adult son. She began to tell me the story of how her son and his best friend had been shot. He was critically injured and his best friend was murdered. Another story of gun violence. There were numerous losses here, a physical death and a loss of health. Her son had to move back home with his mother for his recovery. His recovery for the injury was very slow. When he felt better several months later, he moved back to his apartment in another state. Because of his physical limitations, he was not able to do the things he used to do at the same speed, mentally and physically. Those limitations eventually took a toll on him. The additional experience of survivor's remorse only made continuing more difficult for him. And at the age of 22, her son died by firearm suicide. Carla had a very long journey of grief. It was the death of a child. It was a sudden death, a death by suicide. It was a death people do not want to discuss. Whom could Carla share her pain with and not be judged? Carla's mind was racing with questions. She questioned if there was anything she could have done differently that could have prevented his death by suicide. She questioned if there was something she had overlooked. Why did this happen to them? Numerous thoughts ran through her mind. Her world stopped. Her whole world stopped. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She was not herself. She missed him every day and still does. She was out of tears by the anniversary of his death. She had to do something. Grief changes you. Through her grief and pain, Carla turned her pain into action and became a certified grief coach to help others survivors. She had dedicated her life to preventing gun suicide and providing grief counseling to help others find healing. She is a gun violence prevention advocate. Carla also helps others through her podcast. Her son's death moved her to fulfill her divine purpose. Her son did leave a letter for her to read, which helped her in her journey of grief. Our letters will also help our loved ones when we are gone by death. Sudden deaths do not allow us to say our goodbyes. We do not get the opportunity to say, I wanted you to know. Deaths that are anticipated because of illness often provide that opportunity to say, I wanted you to know. Some can do this by phone call. Others can visit and say it in person. This is Joyce. When a loved one is sick and dies, there is pain. It's a different kind of pain. Another mother, I'll call her Joyce, shared that her son died slowly from the disease of cancer. The life her son had once had was slowly being stripped from him. Yeah, give me for a second. I got to get where I can prop up here. Hopefully. Oh, man. Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay. This live is restricted for mature audiences. Everybody on here better be 18, y'all. Ain't that stupid when you got to be 18 to be on this app in the first place? I mean, come on, man. Be straight up. You know, you got to be 18 to be here, and they want to put a stipulation upon it. All right, let me get this thing straightened out here real quick. Hold on. All right, yep, it's still, I had to make sure my thing's still charging. That didn't work. Okay, let's see what we got here. All right, where am I at? Where was Joyce at? Okay. Okay, he had cancer. Numerous limitations took place. He suddenly could not move his legs or arms without pain. He questioned, how can I lead and provide for my family? How can I protect them in this state of helplessness? He became dependent on others. Joyce, who lived in another state, visited him as much as possible. She was there to offer support to him, his wife, and their children in their time of need. Joyce felt helpless, unable to provide what he really needed, a body free from cancer and pain. I wrote earlier how the mindset of death is different when death is sudden versus not being sudden. This grief looks different. Joyce and her family witnessed the declining health that brought great pain and suffering to her son. The deterioration of his body was grueling to watch. 18 months from his diagnosis with cancer, he died. Numerous treatments and surgeries to remove his kidneys only gave false hope that he would survive this terrible disease. What a roller coaster of emotion that can bring. Joyce was physically, emotionally exhausted, as she put it, from wrestling with God. God heal him to stay here with us, his family, or take him to be with you in eternity with a perfect, pain-free body. When Joyce says the word wrestle, I think of the scripture, Genesis 32:24-26. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. Wrestling with God through prayer can look like negotiating with God. Was Joyce wrestling God for a blessing? The family members, what are they going to do? In their helplessness, started to pray to God that he would receive their son, husband, and father quickly to stop the pain and suffering he was experiencing. Joyce released, surrendered to God. No more wrestling. Death can bring relief to the living and definite relief to the dying. No more suffering and pain. Deanna. I have no idea the suffering a parent feels when they experience the death of their child, but I do have an understanding of feeling helpless when your child is suffering. When my oldest daughter, Deanna, had surgery and the meds were not received in a timely manner after the surgery, I prayed that God would take the pain from her and that I would receive it. That did not happen. What did happen was, until the medicine arrived and was administered to her, my husband, Michael, my youngest daughter, Kaya, and I sang songs praising God. We remembered the scripture, Psalms 98:4. Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all the earth. Make a loud noise and rejoice and sing praise. It was so long ago that I cannot remember if it was Deanna's idea for praise songs to be sung or if it was Michael's suggestion, and she nodded yes to the singing. We sang the words we remembered off key. This helped Deanna shift her focus from the intense pain to some temporary relief. I think our singing released endorphins in her brain. Endorphins are neurotransmitters that can create feelings of happiness. Even so, it is a terrible feeling to watch your child suffer in pain. Paul. The conversation about death, I find, is often very uncomfortable for people to talk about. It is often easier for a person to talk about a loved one who has died than the future death of a loved one. Talking about a loved one who has already died gives the person the opportunity to share a memory that was created. We love to keep the person's memory alive. When talking about a future death, we are hesitant to continue the conversation. We stop talking because it has not happened, and it's too painful to think about. So if we're not going to talk about death, let's at least make that call or visit the living now. Prepare your letter of love to help them later. I'll share one more person's story of how grief affected him in two different situations. Let's call this person Paul. Paul was enjoying dinner with his family when he received a call of panic from his grandmother. He immediately left his family and drove to her. Once he arrived, he helped calm his frantic grandmother down while he watched the paramedics trying to find his grandfather's pulse. He witnessed his grandfather code several times. Coding generally refers to a cardiac arrest, and the immediate life-saving resuscitation efforts were needed. Paul's grandfather was immediately taken to the closest hospital, and not too long after, he was transferred to a second hospital where a medical procedure was done to keep him alive. Paul was in work mode. He was alert and ministering with no time to be emotional. Yet again, his grandfather was transferred to a third hospital, one more equipped to provide for the treatment for his grandfather needed. The doctors told Paul they were going to awaken his grandfather, and Paul could talk to him. Think about what Paul's grandfather was going through. He was sedated in the intensive care unit. He was on a ventilator. Grandfather had passed out several hours ago and probably did not know where he was. He had been talking to his spouse. Now he was about to wake up with a breathing tube down his throat, connected to a ventilator to help him breathe. His arms were strapped down to prevent him from pulling the tube out of his mouth. He wouldn't be able to talk or even ask questions, even if he were alert enough to. He would wait till lights glaring, machines beeping, and intravenous and IV drip in his arm, providing essential fluids directly into his bloodstream. What is going on? Where am I? When grandfather awoke, Paul made direct eye contact with him while holding his hands. He said, "You're in the hospital. You had a heart attack. Do exactly what the doctors say because they're going to take this tube out of your mouth." His grandfather quickly understood and listened attentively. Prior to the uncomfortable tube being removed from his mouth, his hands were loosed but not released completely, allowing some limited hand movement. His grandfather wrote the best he could on a pad of paper. Scared. The grandfather Paul had always known as a man of strength and looked up to, the one who had carried Paul in the times of need, was scared. That experience did something to Paul. Seeing his grandfather code several times and knowing that he was scared caused fear to grip his heart. Paul didn't grieve death. He grieved peace of mind. He grieved the loss of feeling secure. Death had become more real to him. Intrusive thoughts invaded his peace. Calls from his grandparents quickly put him on high alert. His heart began to race and his mind whirled with questions, wondering if everything was all right before he answered the call. If a phone call came while he sat at the same restaurant as before with his family, he would immediately think the worst case scenario. These are the effects of grief without a physical death. 6 months later, after they had been married for 15 years, Paul's wife died by suicide. This time, Paul was not in work mode. He was not alert and ministering to others. He was very emotional. After the shock of seeing her lifeless body, not knowing how much time had passed, he got off the floor and called 911, crying into the phone. He later ran out of the house, screaming hysterically. He couldn't breathe. His wife's death was a sudden death. There were no goodbyes. Express your love now. Prepare your love letters for later. I want to believe when a person's death is by suicide, they were in a place of hopelessness, that their thoughts became dark and unclear from the pain they were experiencing. They just wanted to escape the pain and discomfort. Paul, like others and myself, has been left with numerous happy memories, but also with the journey of grief to travel. Mary was left with the sound of the knock of the door from the police officer. Paul is left with the sound of a gunshot or any loud popping sound. He is not expecting to trigger a physical sickness in his body. And I'm left with the sound of the ringing phone as they share the news of death with me. We travel this road together. Okay, everybody. Do we go on? That was chapter 1. All righty. Here we go. Chapter 2. My journey through 6 deaths. In chapter 1, you read about a few of my clients' grief in the face of death and my helplessness with my daughter's pain. While I've never experienced a parent's pain at the death of a child, I have endured that pain as a daughter, daughter-in-law, granddaughter, sister, and aunt. And my life is forever changed with each death I experience. I wake up each day with a smile on my face, knowing I have another opportunity to just celebrate life, make a difference, and enjoy family, friends, and coworkers. I roll over in bed, greet my husband, and feel grateful that we're together. Then, within minutes, reality sets in. It wasn't a dream. It really happened. A loved one has died. My smile is gone, and sadness takes over. My everyday life is more of a struggle, as if it weren't already challenged with family and work before. Before death, before the journey of grief, I didn't give it much thought that death was near. Yes, I was always aware no one lives forever. The Bible speaks of a time to be born and a time to die in Ecclesiastes 3:2. So I knew death was inevitable. Before the grief journey, I was carefree, going about my day without much concern. My attitude was, if something doesn't get done, I'll do it tomorrow, next week, next month, or even next year. I have plenty of time to do these things I want to do. I'm not going to live forever, but at least until I'm in my 90s, like my grandmother and my father did, I'll eventually declutter my basement, buy another car, schedule that vacation, and yes, finish writing my book. Now, after death on the journey of grief, I am less carefree. I am more intentional with my time. I'm more of a planner now. My new motto is this: do what you can while you can. I don't walk around with thoughts of dying, but I do walk around with thoughts of being more productive with my time. I don't have plenty of time to do things. I find myself making plans to do the things I want to do now. No longer lackadaisical, but more energized, excited to make a difference with the time I do have today. Everything has changed since I have experienced death. The journey of grief has changed my outlook of life with the people I love. I appreciate the time I have with family and friends. I no longer take life for granted. I look forward to my future by enjoying the present. During the journey of grief, my emotions are all over the place. I'm in denial. This can't be happening. Then I'm angry because it is happening. And I have no control to stop death from occurring. I have fear, believing someone else I love is going to die. I'm relieved that the loved one is no longer suffering in pain, then angry because they left me, as if they deliberately died. You can experience copious amounts of emotion on the journey of grief. The intensity of the pain subsides some, but the journey never ends for me because I always miss them. At times, as time distances itself from the date of the death, as the years go by and the stronghold of death on me loosens, it doesn't change the fact that I still miss them. Sometimes I stop and think, if they had not died, what would we be doing today? What new memories would we have created? That would have to be a no-brainer. My niece would have grown up to be an adult and possibly dated and married and had children. My mother would have been able to experience the growth of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. My oldest sister would have gotten to know her grandchildren. My grandmother did live a long life and experienced the growth of her great-great-grandchildren. But that doesn't change the fact I wanted her to enjoy life longer with me. My father also experienced all those things, but I still didn't want to say goodbye to him. And my mother-in-law had the opportunity to live a long life and see her children grow to be adults and have their children and great-grandchildren. It doesn't change that fact. I still miss them dearly. If they hadn't died, they would have continued to share with me all the exciting and disappointing things of life. My life would have been richer with the endless possibilities of growth. These things are no longer available to me and others who grieve the death of a loved one. My personal journey of grief has involved the death of 6 family members. The first death was on April 1979, and the latest death occurred while I was writing this book in April 2023. In grief and in pain, I longed to hear their voice, to talk, to communicate with them. If only I had a card, note, or letter to read of my journey of grief would not be as difficult. The only thing they left were memories. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Thank God for our memories, our happier times together. But I wanted more than just memories. Don't you want more too? I will later show you how to prepare letters for your loved ones to read after you have died. Hopefully each one of us woke up in the morning thinking, this will be a good day. And even if we weren't thinking it was going to be a good day, I don't think any of us anticipate getting a phone call that someone in our family has died. As you continue to read, you will see how the complexities of death, sudden death, and expected death compound our pain. My niece died first, April 18th, 1979, at 22 months of age. I was 24 years old. I didn't realize how much her death affected me until many years later. Then my mother died, March 24th, 1997, at the age of 70. My grandmother died February 1st, 2000, at the age of 90. My oldest sister died October 14th, 2001, at the age of 55. And my father died March 7, 2022, at age 92. He would have been 93 had he lived 6 more weeks. While writing this book, my mother-in-law died April 17, 2023, at the age of 87. She had just celebrated her birthday 4 weeks prior. This was a different kind of pain. It involved seeing my husband's heartache. His father had died several years earlier, and with the death of his mother, he too was parentless, like I was. When both your parents die, I believe there's a sudden awakening that your time is shorter than you thought previously. We can no longer be parented. Yes, I am an adult and had thought I no longer need parenting, but when both are absent, I now realize I still do. Yes, I still have elders to guide me, but there is nothing like talking to mommy and daddy. That thought just makes me smile to know I did have them both. It also brings tears to know I no longer have them with me. When my niece died, I was in disbelief. I questioned the reason babies and children die. She didn't live long enough to hold a conversation, to know her family's names. I was and still am heartbroken. When my mother died, I was so devastated I could barely continue. It was the first death I had experienced of someone I had loved for a long time. Mothers aren't supposed to leave their children. I felt abandoned. I was an adult when she died. I was married to my first husband with a son named Dale. I know she didn't deliberately die on me. She still left me though, whether intentionally or not. Next, my grandmother died. Didn't my grandmother know that without mom, she definitely had to stay to pick up the slack and continue giving me guidance, comfort, and courage and love? Then my oldest sister died. I was really scared then with no grandmother, mother, and older sister. I'm next in line to know things. So I was scared and angry. Let me emphasize, angry. Yes, I was angry because I had no control over all these terrible things happening to me. How was it affecting my well-being? I was not well with these deaths. Then my father died. I was parentless. I have no parents to call when I need guidance or have questions. No parents, no older sister. I do have an older brother named Ted, but I'm the oldest female now. You know how it goes. I'm expected to be the matriarch of the family. At least that was what I thought until I had counseling. I thought it was I who was to keep the family in contact with each other like my grandmother, mother, and sister did. One of them always had Easter, 4th of July, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, or Christmas dinner at their house. Mother's Day was at my mother's house, and sometimes we celebrated occasions at grandmother's senior citizen apartment at her request. Imagine at least 10 family members crammed into my grandmother's single one-bedroom apartment where the living room and the dining room table were all in one very small area. We made it happen. Those were some of my best memories with my grandmother and family. Those three women would coordinate what time each person would arrive and what each person would bring. Then my mother-in-law died, another female, the parent of my husband. My days were going just fine. Then bam, another disturbing phone call. 6 different calls changed my world forever. Who's prepared for this unwelcome, debilitating information? My husband and I grieved together. Though I didn't know how terribly well, the times that we did visit, she always made me feel at home, part of the family. She was kind to my son, Dale, and me when we visited before marriage. She had a beautiful smile. What I do know is she raised her son well. Michael and I will have been married for 36 years, October 2023. When my mother died, my immediate family members were living with me in Georgia. My husband, my 18-year-old son, and my 2 daughters, one almost age 9 and the other almost age 7, I was glad I was not physically alone with my grief. My family did the best they could to comfort me. What they didn't know was that their actions brought me no relief, no peace, no comfort. My husband held me, allowing me to cry. Sometimes we cried together. His actions were kind and thoughtful, yet I still felt alone. How could he or anyone else know what I felt? He was physically present, but in no way could he or my children relate or understand the mental anguish I was experiencing. I would get up daily in a fog, not trusting what was real and what was some twisted nightmare. I was just going through the motions. Whom could I talk to, or who would understand? It was a very lonely experience. Imagine being in a room full of people you can see, but they cannot see you. If they could see when you spoke, no sound would come out of your mouth. I kept thinking, I'm alone because no one understands what I'm experiencing. If a person slams a door on their hand accidentally, you could say, ouch, I know that hurt you, but I do not know what you are actually feeling because it's not your experience. Don't you dare say you know how I feel my grief. Do you really know the relationship I had with my deceased loved one? Nevertheless, what helped was my husband listening to me, asking what I needed and how he could help me, and then doing those things. He could help with getting the young girls bathed, fed, and off to school. He could go food shopping, cook meals, wash clothes, etc. I cared, but I didn't care if those things took place. I was lost in my own pain. This journey of grief was brutal. I remember working on keeping a straight face, not letting my girls see me cry. I hadn't told them their grandmother, who lives in New Jersey, had died. I didn't want them to think it was the grandmother in Texas, my husband's mother. I did tell my son my mother had died. I felt I was betraying them by not telling them. They were too young to know of this tragic event. In my eyes, I wanted to protect them from the pain I was experiencing, but keeping the death a secret only increased my burden. My secret did not help my journey of grief. I did not know how to protect my children. I did not know what to do to even help myself. I was, as others are also, very limited on how to support others with death. Some words and actions are helpful, others are not. Until you experience death, you will not know how to respond or even know what really helps someone. Listening to their needs or asking how to help is a good start. What I found most helpful in my family in supporting me and my grief was their presence, walking alongside me in my journey of grief, even with their limitations. Another thing I look back on that was helpful was my family and others being proactive, not asking, but stepping up to the plate, sending meals, cutting the grass if it was needed, taking the girls for a moment. When they jumped in and did these things, it lessened my responsibility while I was on the journey of grief. No note card or letter was left by my dying family members to help me with my grief. No words of comfort from my mother, grandmother, older sister. I know my niece was too young to leave a letter, but I could imagine what she would have said. The people you will read about in the following chapters all just left me. They were gone too soon for me. My father was in hospice care, and he and I both knew he was leaving this earth. He believed he would have eternal life with Jesus Christ. We communicated frequently before he died, and I verbally said, I wanted you to know. More about that later. I wanted you to know letters of love will help you to make it through the journey of grief with less pain and the difficulties and challenges death will bring. They will especially help those who did not get the chance to say goodbye to their loved ones, like the mother whose son died in an accident. My letter will tell you what I wanted you to know. Chapter 3, Death of a Niece. My niece Danielle Nicole Camp. Forgive me, guys. I gotta get my legs twisted right. My niece Danielle Nicole Camp died at age 22 months on April 18th of 1979. Before I dive into the details of her death, first let me tell you a little bit about my younger sister Regina, not my baby sister Tracy, who lost her little girl on that dreadful day. I was born prematurely, a 7th-month preemie baby, and Regina was a full-term baby. I learned from my mother that because of this, people thought we were fraternal twins because we were about the same height for many years. To this day, I still do not remember many childhood events. My mother would tell me stories that Regina would protect me and beat up anybody who was bothering me. She stuck her foot out and made little kids fall. I wonder what that was about. I remember us running together trick-or-treating when we lived in Germany. We were living in Germany at the time since my father was in the army. We lived on an army base. We would fill our pillowcases with so much candy and run home to empty them. Then we would run back to the buildings we had not collected candy from. We did everything together, playing, school, and going to Saturday matinees. One school program we were in, I remember wearing kimono outfits and doing some skits. We had fun. We always looked forward to the candy lady coming. She would pull up in a little vehicle and sell all types of candy. My favorite was candy shells. It was a half shell filled with some honey candy. We would lick until it was gone. Regina and I often had a race to see who would finish first. My parents would have parties, and my sister and I would dance until we were told to go to bed. Imagine 2 little girls dancing, being the center of adults' attention. We loved it. When I look back at the pictures, my mother dressed my sister and me in matching outfits. She sewed some of them. Later, when my baby sister arrived, my mother continued matching the 3 of us with the same outfits. Another memory I have was Regina and I hitting June bugs with our badminton rackets. I don't think they were tennis rackets because I don't recall playing tennis. That was fun, hitting them down to the ground. It's really silly, the things you remember. As we became adults, we would sometimes hang out together and go places. My sister was always kind to me. She still lives in New Jersey, and I'm in Georgia. Even today, I could call her and we could talk for hours if time allowed with our busy schedules. She still makes me laugh. Because of these fond memories and love for my younger sister, the impact of my niece's death was intensified. I didn't want my sister to grieve the way she did. I'm going to share Regina's delivery of Danielle's brother Coral first. I remember Regina started to have labor pains, so my mother drove her to the hospital while my father started to put the crib together. I remember we went to the elevator together, Regina walking slowly, very slowly, probably because of the pain of labor. Once at our destination, she went ahead with the nurse while I waited. My mother later joined us after parking the car. My nephew Coral was delivered soon after. My sister later told me the doctors fussed at her because the baby was crowning as soon as she got on the examining table. I was excited for my sister to have a healthy baby boy. I remember holding and feeding and changing him. Life was different having a little person now living with us. My sister and I were still living with our parents when my nephew was born. I didn't feed, bathe, change my niece's diaper, or push her in her stroller because by now my sister and I no longer lived together. In the short 22 months of my niece's life, I failed to get to know my sister and her children better. I do remember watching my niece at my apartment one time. I put her in Dale's crib, and my son slept in the bed with me that night. I remember her smiling when I held her. I felt proud to know her. My sister trusted me to watch her that night, which gave her the opportunity to spend time with other adults. I remember visiting my niece in the hospital in New Jersey one day. I left sad because she had an IV in her little arm, and it was wrapped up to keep her from messing with it. I don't remember if it held her or if she cried, and it saddens me that I don't. I do remember being at my office on April 18th, which is also my birthday, when the office phone rang. My coworker answered the phone 2 desks ahead of me and immediately turned around and looked at me. The next thing I knew, I was on the phone, and my mother was telling me my niece was dead. I had no words. It was all a blur, and it still is to this day. What did I do after that? I don't remember. I do remember I went to a funeral. I do remember my grandmother saying things to my grieving sister that weren't nice. They were not comforting words. We act differently when we are grieving. I had so many questions that day, but I never asked. I guess I blocked it out. Death does terrible things to you. I must admit, I did not understand grieving and death when my niece died. I did not understand the death of a child, the most devastating loss there is. It is just understood no one has to tell you. Parents should not outlive their children. Parents die first, children die last. My sadness, the depth of my pain and my grief come from not knowing her. It's not just because she died so young, but because I didn't take the time to know my niece. She was alive. In my ignorance, I was not present for my sister. I was neither there for her at the time of her daughter's death nor after. Was I preoccupied with my niece dying on my birthday? Was my focus on my husband, our 5-month-old son, and work? Only God knows. When I attended the funeral service, I was sad for my sister, but I did not ask her if she needed anything. I did nothing. And it would be years before I started on the journey of grief concerning my niece. Coffee, then the next chapter. What do y'all think? This is intermission, y'all. This is coffee with Clell, so we've got to have coffee because we got plenty of Clell. Paul, good night, brother. God bless you. Thank you, thank you. Chapter 4, Death of Mother. My mother, Minnie Lee Camp, died at age 70. She celebrated her birthday on February 6, 1997, and died on March 24, 1997, 7 weeks later. In March of that year, she had made the decision to have open heart surgery to repair a blocked valve. At least, that is what I remember her saying. I neither researched what she shared with me, nor had any concern for her well-being. She assured me things would be fine. She's my mother. She was the type of mother who made sacrifices for her children, cooking, cleaning, helping us with homework, sewing, and making clothes for me and my 2 younger sisters. Not only did her words say, "I love you," but so did her service to us. So when she assured me things would be fine, why would I doubt her? When I asked if I should travel from Georgia to visit her in New Jersey, she replied, no, and encouraged me to visit the following month when my older sister, Gwen, was going to be in the hospital for a kidney transplant. She said there was no use traveling twice in such a short period of time. So when the time came for her to be admitted for surgery on Wednesday, March 19, 1997, I went to work as usual. I remember that what Mom said at the time made sense to me. Traveling that 1,000 miles twice in less than a month? Yes, one trip made good sense, both time-wise and financially. Let's not forget, I also had to coordinate leaving my husband with 3 children with both his and my work schedules. Around noon that day, I hadn't heard from my father concerning the surgery schedule that morning, thinking no news is good news. I remember calling my father later that day and learning the surgery had been successful. That was 26 years ago. The last time I spoke to her was prior to her going into the hospital because she didn't want to have a phone in her room. I don't remember the reason why. I hope it wasn't because of money, because I would have given it to her. I want to believe she didn't want a phone so that she could get rest after surgery to help her recover faster. I remember that on March 23rd, my father told me my mother was doing fine. She was doing so well that instead of being discharged the following Wednesday, 7 days after the surgery, she probably would be discharged the next day, a Monday. Then it happened. After my three sisters and Michael and I had retired to bed, the phone by our bed rang. It was the middle of the night, and cell phones weren't out yet. I answered in a low, slumber-laden voice. My father said, "Your mother didn't make it." My head started to spin, trying to understand his words. She didn't make it where? The bathroom? What was he talking about? Was I on the phone? Was I still asleep dreaming? My father went on to say he had left the hospital and was called back. More words were said before I got off the phone. I shared what I thought I had heard. My husband held me as I cried in disbelief. I was numb. I was devastated. It felt like my heart had stopped because I knew my world did. The next morning, I started remembering what I was told in the middle of the night, recalling I had received a disturbing phone call. More tears. I called my office and told them I wouldn't be in. My mother had died. There, I'd said it. When I called my oldest sister, Gwen, her husband, Benjamin, answered the phone. He answered the phone saying his mother-in-law was no longer there. I don't think he knew to whom he was talking to. I told him who I was, and he continued to talk, even though no one had yet to say died. I knew it was true. My mother had died. As soon as I heard confirmation, my mind immediately went to the things I no longer had. The brain is a mystery to me. You might think I would think of fond memories, but no, that didn't happen to me or others I've talked to. I thought of my losses. No phone calls, hugs, kisses, holding my hand, laughter, smiles, or conversations. When visiting New Jersey, there would be no home-cooked meals, eating out, shopping, or going to church together. The good memories came later. Holding my hand when crossing the street and cooking chicken and dumplings, one of my favorites when I requested it. I made that request even after I married and moved. When I went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, to attend the Army Management. Did I miss a page? Nope. Army Management Staff College for 3 months. She agreed without hesitation to watch my two youngest children. I remember that when I had a break from class, she brought the girls and met me. We went to the Smithsonian. Those were great memories. Another time, after applying and being selected for a position at Fort Hood, Texas, my mother agreed to drive with me to get my car out there. I was transferring my job from Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. I was hopeful my husband and 3 children would join me soon. On our 3-day trip, we connected more. I valued the time she took from being home with her husband and other adult children, journeying with me. She was especially helpful when Mother's Day came and I was away from my children on that special holiday. I remember crying and holding her tight and saying everything was going to be okay, and it was because she said so. Many years after my mother had died, at least 20 years had passed, I told my father I was gathering information to write a book and asked if he could share what he remembered of that day of my mother's death. This is what I remember my father sharing. He said he received a call from the hospital telling him he needed to return to the hospital. His thoughts were that they were going to release her even earlier. Maybe that was the reason he had to go back. What was different was they called him to a private room and told him she had passed. A valve from her leg had broken and she had bled to death. My father paused for a moment and held his face in his hands. When he finally looked up with red, tearful eyes, he continued, I deliberately asked him questions about the past, about his deceased wife and my deceased mother. Again, being ignorant, I never guessed my questions would cause him to cry. These are painful memories. It's hard not to be emotional. Seeing him cry, I fought back tears, trying not to cry. I apologized to him and he responded, I guess I needed to cry. He continued with the story. He thought Mom probably had a premonition of her death because they had a conversation in the hospital that addressed and cleared up things in their marital relationship. With that conversation and the good news of her recovering well, she would be released early. He went home that Sunday evening and excitedly prepared for her return home. They would have a new start in their relationship. It did not cross his mind that when he returned to the hospital, he would be told his wife, after 49 years of marriage, had died. I wanted to ask more questions. What emotion did you experience hearing that? Did you start screaming, crying, or getting angry? What did you do next? Whom did you call first? I stopped. We were both emotionally spent. We never talked about her death again. I didn't get the chance to hug or kiss her before she went into the hospital. And sadly enough, I don't remember saying I love you. I do remember saying I'll see you next month. I didn't see her alive next month. I saw her dead in a casket at the funeral home and the next at the funeral. Kaya, my youngest daughter, did not want to see her grandmother dead. So at the funeral, she sat in another room until the casket was closed. A person, especially a child, should never be forced to see a dead body. I would never be the same again. The journey of grief is difficult terrain to travel. It's a journey you must start and complete if you choose life and not death. My world stopped when my mother died. I couldn't think or process what others were saying to me. I was in complete fog. My father called me constantly, inquiring why I wasn't there with him. Mom had died Monday. It was Tuesday, and I was supposed to be present in New Jersey, where he and my 4 siblings were. I stopped taking calls from him, and Michael answered them. I remember going downstairs to the basement of our home and screaming. I was losing my mind. I questioned what was happening to me. It's called grief. I would like to say my grief journey started upon learning of her death, but it did not. Yes, I cried. Yes, I was sad. Yes, I was angry. I spoke at my mother's funeral. I was at her burial site. Still, my grief journey hadn't really started. I was in complete denial. My journey was delayed. I pretended. When I thought of her, I did not think of her as being dead, but only she was not available. She didn't call because she was busy working, shopping, sleeping, even on trips where telephones didn't have good reception. I believe denial is often the grieved person's first emotion. Denial and shock are synonymous to me. Denial and shock, I believe, are necessary to continue after hearing a loved one has died. By being in this state of denial, shock, I could continue. I was able to prepare myself and family for travel to New Jersey. I was able to call my office. My team leader gave her condolences and asked if I needed anything. I told her I needed money so my entire family of 5 could attend my mother's funeral with me. My office took up a collection and gave me money. My husband and 3 children did get to travel with me. My father asked if I would say some words at the funeral. I don't know if he asked my other siblings, but I said yes. The song Going Up Yonder was sung. It was beautiful. Several people spoke and time was going by. Then it happened. My father leaned forward, looked at me, and said it was time. I knew what he meant. Imagine this. The church was full. The pastor and the other elders were seated up in the pulpit, and a man was speaking, probably about how he knew my mother, or maybe he was talking about God. I don't know. My mind was elsewhere. I saw my mother's casket in the middle of the speaker talking. I stood up. My family was in the front row on the right side of the church. The speaker looked at me, probably in shock, and then turned and looked at the pastor. I remember the pastor addressing the speaker, and he sat down. The pastor nodded at me and motioned with his hand for me to come up from where I was seated, and everyone was looking at me as I slowly walked up to the podium on the right. Time stood still. I was moving. Everyone else was frozen. Time started back once I made eye contact with the guests. I had planned the words to say about my mother, but after thanking everyone for coming out to pay their respects, I started singing. I hadn't planned to sing. Out of nowhere, I started to sing. I just can't stop praising the Lord. If I had planned to sing, I would have learned the words to the song. What I did was sing the chorus repeatedly, and even enough that the organ player started the music that went with the song. I looked down at my family and noticed my father crying. I was still experiencing the emotion of anger. I was angry. My father was still living and my mother was not. But when I saw his tears, they softened my heart. They kept me from saying what I was thinking and kept me from following my written notes. After singing and speaking, I returned to my seat, joining my family. My youngest sister, Tracy, put her hand on mine and said softly, "You did good." I still do not remember all that I said at my mother's funeral, but I do remember not speaking in anger, but in love. More things happened before I started my journey of grief. First, Mother's birthday, February 6, 1998, would come without her. Then the 1-year anniversary of her death, March 24, 1998. Next, my birthday, April 18, 1998, without her here to wish me happy birthday. Before Mother's Day, I believe at the end of April, my grief journey started at my desk at Fort McPherson, Georgia. I was coming out of that denial shock of her death. I became so overwhelmed with grief, I had to call Michael for him to talk me through what to do. I listened attentively. Lock your file drawers. Turn off your computer. Get your purse. Make sure you have your car keys and go and tell your supervisor you're leaving. I remember standing at her doorway waiting for the team leader to finish talking to her. When I eventually entered and sat down, I was finally able to speak. Words didn't come out of my mouth, only sounds of torment and tears. I finally managed to share that I had been depressed since my mother died last March and I couldn't do this anymore. I stood up from the office chair and proceeded to run, not walk, down the aisles, down the steps, through the lobby into my car. I took off 1 month. Over a year after my mother's death, I also had several counseling sessions. In that month, I cried out to God. I let him know, as if God Almighty did not already know. I was angry with him because he did not heal my mother. I was angry with my father for his living and her dying. If a parent had to die, I felt she was the nicer one to live. I didn't remember we have free will. Maybe my mother was ready to be with God. Maybe the pain was too great for her to bear. I'll never know. Several times in my grief, God had a friend call me and the doorbell rang and food was delivered. He saw where I was, though I didn't know who I was. Again, you're not yourself when you're grieving. I returned to working half days for 2 weeks before moving back to full time. I wasn't going to continue working at a place I no longer enjoyed being at. Life was too short. My mother's death reminded me of that. I couldn't bear to sit at my desk each day and not receive a call from my mother. I eventually resigned from the government that December 1998 and off the payroll by January 1999. When I am highly stressed, I still want my mommy. On one of those stressful days, my mother came to me in a dream. She sat on the bed and told me everything was going to be okay. I awoke that morning refreshed, not anxious. God knew what I needed. My journey of grief had started with no note, no card, no letter from my mother to help me. This journey was brutal. I still find myself weeping when I think of my mother. Chapter 5, Death of Grandmother. Again, the book is what I wanted you to know. That's the book. If you screenshot that, if you want to get a copy of it, you can take a screenshot of this right here, and that way it'll go straight to Susan, and you can get you a copy of it. You can get a signed copy if you go there. She'll sign the copy for you. My grandmother, Susie Mae McCrae, died at the age of 90 on February 1st, 2000. My grandmother was a very busy lady. After I had my second child in 1988, I was on maternity leave for about 6 months. I remember calling her between 11:30 and 2 p.m. Finally getting myself together and asking her if she'd like me to take her somewhere. No, she was just getting home from walking downtown over the railroad tracks to the post office, bank, bakery, and Steinbach, a department store in Asbury Park, New Jersey. That's how she grew up, dressed, ready, and gone. She walked and rode the bus to the places she wanted to go. She never acquired a driver's license that I knew of. She walked most places. Unlike her daughter, my mother would say if she could drive her car up to the cash register, she would. Needless to say, she became my hangout buddy when I was on maternity leave with both my second and third child. And as they grew, we went places together frequently. Since my husband, mother, and others were at work and my son Dale was at school, she was always a person on the go. I remember that when I was a child, she would hold my sister and my hand as we walked to the boardwalk. The walk from her apartment might have been a 20 to 35 minute walk. Once, when walking there barely 1 block from where she lived, A bird pooped on my white sailor hat and her shoulder. She didn't get mad. She took a handkerchief from her pocketbook and wiped the poop off my shoulder. We just turned around and went back to her apartment, got cleaned up, and continued our journey. At the boardwalk, she put us on a merry-go-round and mixer bowls. She let us eat hot dogs and cotton candy. Other times, after shopping at one of her favorite stores, Steinbach, we would eat at J.J. Newberry's 5 and dime variety store or Woolworth's 5 and dime stores. It was one of those stores. Both were on Cookman Avenue in Asbury Park. I didn't know at that time that those stores were competitors. They were also competing with McCrory. They had anything you needed. What my sister and I liked the most was eating there at the lunch counter. We would sit at the counter on those high stools you could spin around on. I remember Grandma letting us order a banana split sundae. We laughed and had a good time. When I got older before marriage, I remember spending the night and walking with her to the bus stop. We would ride the bus to Spring Lake, New Jersey. I think that's where we went. There she would clean lawyers' offices and I would help her. It was the same office I helped her clean when she worked in Asbury Park. Riding the bus was an adventure. The best part of me was eating lunch in a restaurant. Once I got my driver's license, I would visit her. After buzzing me into her apartment, I would ask her what she was doing. She would answer, I was watching the TV, but then the TV was watching me. She would say the funniest things at times. Several times when watching the TV show Ironside with her, she would remind me at different times about the character in the wheelchair. She would say, he really can't walk. He's just sitting in that chair. The actor's name was Raymond Burr, and he played Chief Robert Ironside, a tough San Francisco police inspector who was paralyzed in a shooting incident. I would smile and say, really, Grandma? On Saturday, 29/2000, I called my grandmother and she answered. That was a surprise to me because she usually hung out with some of her other family members or ladies group. When she didn't answer, I would start calling around to find out who my grandmother was with. I really didn't like sharing her company. I wanted her all to myself. Wasn't I named after her? After making small talk, I asked how she was doing. I was told she felt tired. Nothing hurt. She didn't feel sick, just tired. That was the last time I spoke to her. I believe it was after working hours since my husband and I were both home. Michael answered the phone, and it was my father. He told me my grandmother was dead and had been violated. What are you saying? I immediately fell down on the living room sofa and started wailing. After I calmed down, Michael then clarified his words. I had misunderstood what he had said. I later learned that the maintenance people knocked on her apartment door for scheduled work, and they received no answer. My grandmother had added a chain lock to her door. When they attempted to open the door and the chain lock stopped their entrance, they called out to her. The chain lock was secured from the inside the apartment, so they knew she had to be home. The maintenance people called the emergency contact my grandmother had listed on her application for the apartment. Both my mother and my older sister Gwen's names were listed. My father called my niece Darlene, and she had the responsibility of driving to her mother's work at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, to tell her that her grandmother had not appeared for a scheduled appointment and was also not answering her phone. She was needed at Grandma's apartment. So my father, niece, and oldest sister went. The maintenance people cut out the chain lock and entered her apartment. My grandmother lived in a senior citizen complex. They found my grandmother apparently fast asleep in her bed, but she wasn't sleeping. No note, no card, no letters. She just left. How could she leave me knowing my mother, her daughter, had already left me? This journey was different from my mother's death. The terrain was familiar. My mood was constantly fluctuating, as grief will do at times. As before, I saw my grandmother's body at the funeral home and spoke at the funeral and went to the burial site. The main difference was I started the grief journey immediately, not 1 year later, which caused me complicated grief with my mother. The evening before the funeral, I woke up because my face felt tight, different. I quietly slipped out of the bed and went to the hall room bathroom. I turned the light on and my face was swollen. My face was swollen like a Cabbage Patch doll. What a sight to see. I was scared. I went back to the bedroom, woke my husband, Michael, and warned him my face was swollen before turning on the bedroom light for him to see. We both agreed stress had caused the swelling because the next day I was going to speak at my grandmother's funeral. We prayed and went back to sleep. The next morning the swelling had gone down, enough not to be noticeable by others. But I knew. I screamed, wrote in my journal, traveled to New Jersey, and visited my grandmother's gravesite. I did what I could do without a note, no card, no letter from her. I've never been the same. Chapter 6, Death of the Oldest Sister. My oldest sister, Gwendolyn Lee Powell, died at the young age of 55. She died on October 14, 2001, after several years of living with disease lupus. She was someone older than me to look up to. She was kind and considerate to me and others. I often felt she was taken advantage of because of those awesome traits. I really don't remember her talking bad about anyone, just giving them the benefit of the doubt, excusing negative behavior. She definitely was a giver. You might even say a people pleaser. I remember babysitting for her when my niece was a baby in Germany. She trusted me with the baby. I remembered us dancing to what we now call 60s and 70s music. We danced until we got so tired we fell on the sofa laughing. I remember us going shopping for some material for her kitchen in her home in Neptune, New Jersey. My opinion counted for her. If you needed help, she was the one to give it to you without judgment or criticism. I felt very special when I was with her. She listened to what I had to say, even though I was 9 years younger than she was. When I finally decided to leave my first husband, the man I married at age 20, she welcomed me and my 4-year-old son. We lived with her for several months before I acquired my own place in Eatonton, New Jersey. That meant a lot to me. She trusted me to stay with her family and not cause confusion. We were not the only family members who later lived with her. Regina and her son Carl lived with her briefly. Also, my son Dale lived with her a very short period of time after he had graduated high school and moved back to New Jersey. I don't remember all that he did, but what we did together was always fun. I remember traveling from Georgia to New Jersey, visiting her in the hospital at different times, and she didn't complain while being sick in the hospital. When I learned Gwen was going to have surgery, I called and told her I was coming up to see her. She tried to persuade me not to come, but I wasn't going to listen to her. My mother influenced me not to come up to New Jersey when she was going to have heart surgery, and I didn't, and I never got to speak to her again. I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. So I flew to New Jersey and went to the hospital where Gwen was. She wasn't talking. It was like she was in a deep sleep. When the nurse came to draw blood or prick her with a needle for some medical reason, it was like she was in a deep sleep. When the nurse came to draw blood or prick her with a needle for some medical reason, she would make a grunting sound of discomfort. Otherwise, no sound or movement came from her. Later, she was recovering and she was taken to another part of the hospital for a test. I remember praying, then a voice in my head said, "I'm not going to heal her." I was shocked. My eyes filled with tears, and a nurse noticed my face and asked if I was okay. All I could do was run out of the hospital room quickly to the outside of the hospital. Outside, I called my husband and told him what I was experiencing. I remember that same day I went over to my father's house and told him he should go visit her and not wait. His response was, "She'll be okay." But she wasn't okay. Later, Gwen was moved to the ICU because her blood pressure was dropping. After going through several glass doors to find her new location, there she was. She was awake, sitting up and talking now. She had a smile and she was glad to see me. Her mood changed later. She cried when she learned she had an infection. I cried too, but not in front of her. I still question myself since I had visited her several times throughout the year while she was in the hospital. Was my recall of visits accurate? Did I have the hospital visits mixed up? Probably. What I do know is I visited her in October 2001, the same year 9/11 happened, and I also talked to her that day. We both cried. So many people were hurt and dying. Complete chaos was happening that day. I was getting near the end of the week. I needed to get back home to my husband and children. My sister was alert, sitting up in bed. We hugged and kissed, and I left, returning to Georgia, I believe, on Wednesday or Thursday. Gwen's blood pressure continued to drop, and no fight was left in her. Her body was tired. Lupus had abused it for several years. I received the call Sunday that she had died. Again, I have no words. No note, no card, no letters. She just left. Not only was I grief-stricken, I was also angry again. Breathe, Susan. It felt like I had just buried my grandmother. Now, 22 months later, I was burying my oldest sister. Again, that terrain was familiar. I started my journey immediately as before. I emphasized that I was more prepared. You're never ready for a loved one to leave the earth, but I had visited her the week before her death, the week of her death. Are you ready to hear this? In one of my dreams in the spring before her death, I saw her in a casket wearing the color she would be buried in. You might think that would have prompted me to have a closer relationship. It didn't. But it did prompt me to call up to New Jersey to hear how my sister was doing and learn how she was in the hospital. When I said goodbye to Gwen in the ICU in October 2001 before leaving to return to Georgia, that's when I should have shared what I wanted her to know, but I didn't. What was the reason I didn't express myself to her? My reason was I was going to see her again. We could talk more then. Why burden her with my words? Of course she knew I loved her, cared for her, appreciated her. Didn't I leave my husband and children to fly to New Jersey from Georgia to be with her? After her death, I quickly learned a few important lessons. First, I learned to avoid assumptions. Most assumptions destroy relationships. Second, it is important to verbally express yourself. Say, I love you. And when you talk later, say it again, but only if you mean it. Call family and friends and let them know they were on your mind. You were thinking about them. Third, I learned the importance of following through with your words of affirmation. Schedule a time to spend together if possible. You don't get time back, so make the most of what you have. I'm going to cover, I think 7 is the death of the father's the last one. I'll go ahead and read it. It'll run me a little bit over tonight. Nope, 2 more. I got him father-in-law. I got about, it's a short read, guys. I got about 40 pages. And we're going to stop right here and we'll finish this tomorrow night, Lord willing. Okay? I'm trying to be adherent to my time schedule stuff. My son's upstairs. He wants us to get together and do something real quick. Praise the Lord. What do y'all think? I got about five minutes or so. What do y'all think? It's a tough read, but it gives you insights and stuff, you know. So let's see where we're at here. Got anything going on here? Anybody say anything cool? Don't understand and know anything? One new message. You want to do that? Okay. All right. Cool. I appreciate that, Amo. You know, we're gonna we'll finish it, Lord willing, tomorrow night. You can get the book, and this is the way I recommend it. If you do this, if you scan this barcode right here, it'll scan straight into your phone, kind of stuff. You can you'll order it straight from Susan, and she will autograph it or sign it for you. Okay. If you send me a direct message, I will tell you how to go about getting it from her. But she's a professional therapist now. She's Dr. Susan Clark. She's a friend of mine. If y'all remember, if y'all were here, what was it? Been over a year ago. Michael was with me, and we were on the porch for a couple of nights, and Michael was here. His wife is that's Susan. That's his wife, and so you know. Yeah. There ain't nothing easy about friends and family passing that I know.